White female judge fines black man only to learn he's a federal prosecutor. Judge Emily Collins prided herself on her no-nonsense approach to justice. In her mid-40s and rising quickly through the ranks, she was known for her sharp intellect and unwavering commitment to the law. However, she also carried a subtle but ingrained bias she would never openly admit, a belief that certain people often came into her courtroom because they simply made poor life choices. One Monday morning, her docket was full of routine cases, minor traffic violations, petty thefts, and one that stood out, a man named Marcus Hayes, accused of reckless driving. The police report stated he had been speeding through a residential neighborhood, allegedly endangering children. As Marcus stepped forward, Emily glanced at him and felt an immediate sense of irritation. A black man in his early 30s, wearing a simple blazer over a white shirt, he looked calm but carried a subtle defiance in his posture. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her tone clipped, "do you understand the gravity of this offense?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus replied, his voice steady. The officer who pulled him over testified that Marcus had been driving at least 20 miles over the speed limit. Marcus didn't deny the speeding, but attempted to explain. "Your Honor," he said, "I was rushing to a—" "Save it," Emily interrupted. She'd heard 1,000 excuses before. "Speeding in a residential area is dangerous. I'm fining you $1,000 and suspending your license for 6 months. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Emily cut him off. "This is my courtroom. My decision is final." He nodded, his jaw tightening, and sat back down. As Emily moved on to the next case, she felt a fleeting sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, or so she thought. That afternoon, Emily received an urgent call from her court clerk. "Judge Collins, there's someone here to see you. Says it's about the Marcus Hayes case from this morning." Emily frowned. It wasn't common for defendants to show up again so soon. "Send him in." The door opened and Marcus walked in, this time accompanied by 2 sharply dressed individuals. "Judge Collins," one of them began, "I'm Special Agent Roberts with the Department of Justice. This is my colleague, Special Agent Carter. We'd like to discuss your handling of Mr. Hayes's case." Emily blinked, confused. "I don't see why the DOJ would be involved in a simple traffic violation." Agent Roberts smiled thinly. "Because Mr. Hayes is one of our own. He's a federal prosecutor working on a high-profile case involving police corruption in this very city. In fact, he was en route to meet with key witnesses when he was pulled over. The officers who stopped him? They're under investigation for targeting him specifically." Emily's blood ran cold. "What?" Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, Your Honor. I tried to explain that this morning, but you didn't seem interested. Those officers have been retaliating against me ever since I started building this case. Today was just another attempt to intimidate me." Emily's mind raced. She remembered the officer's smug demeanor and how he had emphasized the recklessness of Marcus's driving. Had she unwittingly played into their hands? I wasn't aware of any of this," Emily stammered. "No, you weren't," Marcus replied, his tone sharp. "Because you didn't bother to listen. You saw a black man and assumed I was just another offender, didn't you?" Emily flushed. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Marcus interrupted. "You didn't even let me finish a sentence before passing judgment." Agent Carter stepped forward. "Judge Collins, we're not here to argue, but we do need you to vacate the fine and license suspension immediately. Marcus's work is critical to our investigation, and your ruling hinders his ability to perform his duties." Emily nodded, feeling a rare and unwelcome sting of shame. "Of course. I'll take care of it right away." Later that evening, Emily sat in her office, replaying the day's events in her mind. She'd always considered herself a fair judge, but today had exposed a blind spot she could no longer ignore. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to his work with renewed determination. The case he was building would not only expose corruption, but also shine a light on the biases that permeated every level of the justice system, including the bench. Emily vowed to do better, but Marcus knew that real change would take more than personal reflection. It would take dismantling the very systems that allowed people like her, and the officers who targeted him, to wield unchecked power, and he was just the man to lead the charge. Emily couldn't sleep that night. Marcus Hayes's words echoed in her mind. "You didn't even let me finish a sentence before passing judgment." She had spent years telling herself she was impartial, a guardian of the law, blind to race or background. But today, she had seen herself through a different lens, a lens that revealed her unconscious biases. The next morning, she arrived at her courtroom early and ordered her clerk to pull every traffic case she had ruled on over the past 6 months. As she sifted through the files, a pattern began to emerge: higher fines and harsher penalties for defendants who looked like Marcus. Her heart sank. She had always thought of herself as progressive, someone who stood against systemic discrimination. Yet here it was, in her own rulings. Meanwhile, Marcus was busy unraveling a much larger web of corruption. The 2 officers who had pulled him over were just the tip of the iceberg. His investigation revealed a pattern of targeting Black professionals in the city: lawyers, doctors, entrepreneurs, people who posed a challenge to their authority. But Marcus wasn't working alone. His team at the DOJ had gathered damning evidence: falsified police reports, coerced witness statements, and even recordings of officers discussing how to put certain people in their place. One name kept appearing in their investigation: Captain Dennis Langley, a high-ranking officer who had been quietly orchestrating this campaign of harassment for years. Marcus's team was ready to make their move. 2 weeks later, Emily was presiding over an unrelated case when her courtroom doors opened abruptly. Marcus Hayes strode in, flanked by Special Agents Roberts and Carter. "Your Honor," Agent Roberts said, "we have a warrant for the arrest of Captain Dennis Langley, who is currently present in this courtroom." Emily's head snapped up. She hadn't noticed Langley sitting in the gallery, watching the proceedings with his usual smug expression. "Captain Langley?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Langley rose slowly, his face betraying no emotion. "This is outrageous!" he growled. Marcus stepped forward, holding up a folder. "Not as outrageous as the evidence we've gathered against you, Captain. Your campaign of harassment ends today." Langley sneered. "You're just another arrogant prosecutor trying to make a name for yourself." "No," Marcus replied, his voice calm but steely. "I'm a prosecutor doing my job, and now it's time for you to face justice." Langley was escorted out in handcuffs, and the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Emily adjourned the session early, needing time to process what had just happened. As Marcus turned to leave, she called after him. "Mr. Hayes, Marcus, can I speak with you for a moment?" He hesitated but nodded. In her chambers, Emily closed the door and faced him. "I owe you an apology, not just for how I treated you in court, but for what I've come to realize about myself since then." Marcus crossed his arms, waiting. "I've been reviewing my own cases," she continued, "and I see now that I've been part of the problem. I want to do better, but I also want to do more than just reflect. How can I help?" Marcus studied her for a moment, as if weighing her sincerity. Finally, he said, "You can start by pushing for transparency in your courtroom, recording all proceedings, reviewing officer testimony more critically, and working with community leaders to ensure fair treatment for everyone who comes before you." Emily nodded. "Done. And if there's anything else—" "There is," Marcus interrupted. "When we bring Captain Langley to trial, I want you to preside over the case. I want someone who's willing to hold themselves accountable to handle this." Emily's breath caught. "You trust me to be impartial after everything that happened?" Marcus's expression softened slightly. "I trust that you've learned, and more importantly, I trust that you won't forget." The trial of Captain Dennis Langley became a turning point in the city's history. Evidence presented by Marcus and his team exposed a culture of corruption and prejudice that reached far beyond Langley. Emily's fair handling of the case earned her respect from both the community and her peers. As Langley was led away in handcuffs for the second time, Emily met Marcus's gaze across the courtroom. In that moment, she realized that justice wasn't about perfection. It was about the courage to confront your flaws and work tirelessly to do better. And she was ready to do just that. Leave a comment if you enjoyed this story. It doesn't cost you anything, and you'll make me very happy. Thank you, and I look forward to your like.